You're listening to the PAZNIA Radio Network.
Hey pioneers, my name is Fillmore Katz and I am a Jewish lawyer. Richard Greaser asked me to give my thoughts on some legal theory regarding the revelations from Lola Leitz's recent piece in The Rage. It appears that Luke's lawyers have been working on attempting to set some legal precedents around spam and are alleged to be drafting letters to mining pools. They seem to want to use threats of government coercion in order to further their goals of how they think other businesses should operate, as well as how individuals should be running nodes in their own homes. If there is one thing that gets a Jewish lawyer like me excited, it is lawfare and outrageous legal theory. Let it be said, two can play this game, but the Jew always wins. A legal precedent was set in 1919 in the United States Supreme Court case, Schenck v. United States, that shouting fire in a crowded theater was not a First Amendment protected activity, as it was done to unjustly incite panic. Actions like these are dangerous and immoral. We have seen in recent months individuals attempt to incite panic that Bitcoin will die as a result of running core version 30. This is patently false, as raising the op return limit will have almost no effect whatsoever at encouraging spam, as it is 4 times as expensive as current inscription mechanisms. Individuals including uncredentialed professors, influencers, mining pool operators, podcasters, and developers have repeatedly shouted fire in the crowded theater, which is Bitcoin, Twitter, etc. They have used threats of state violence as a mechanism to enforce node policy and have concocted wild theories on exploitative material being dispersed on the Bitcoin blockchain. I am not an advocate for state violence, as I believe humans can resolve many issues without violence from powerful criminal gangs who are made up predominantly of individuals who consume exploitative materials. But the ones shouting fire in crowded theaters need to understand that if they are to live by the sword of attempting to wield the pedophilic ruling class against their political opponents, they may indeed die by the sword, as they themselves are failing their own legal purity tests. Terrorizing the plebs for your own political goals is immoral, but also in this case, likely illegal. I would encourage individuals to quit amplifying the ones shouting fire, as you could be unintentionally breaking the law, but also unintentionally hurting and scaring the plebs. With the introduction of the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, this issue becomes even more legally dangerous, as shouting fire in the theater and inciting mobs of angry plebs could be interpreted as threats to national security. I have answered this question pro bono, as I know the Bugle journalists spend all their money on cigarettes, and I was interested in this topic. If you would like to have your legal questions answered, you can reach out to me at the Jewish law firm Katz & Goldberg, where you can talk to me for just a small amount of $5,000 an hour. Remember that when it comes to law, the Jewish lawyers always win. Have a good day, folks, and enjoy the podcast.
Hiding things, harming others, stopping others from harming you. I'm Thane Riddle. This is Cloak Dagger.
Yo baby, yo baby, yo baby. How's tricks, my ashwagandhans? Here's Thane Riddle punching in for another underpaid shift. Today I see the Xmas tree of ashwagandha. It's a palm tree. It's already starting to collect some decorations and gifts, and well, they may just be coconuts. I didn't look very closely. You're listening to the PAZNIA Radio Network, the most spectacular treasure in history. This is the Vonu Life Resurrected special, and we're going to be shilling that and talking about that and all that crap later. We're hopefully live on zap.streams, so you can zap us silly, which is a gay way to say send some Bitcoin. Or you can, if you're a little less gay than that, you can go to xmrchat.com/PAZNIA Radio. Tell them Thane sent you, send them some Monero. Go to PAZNIA.com/SimpleX Radio. Get your ass into PAZNIA Radio Network chat on SimpleX. Do put, because I know you're all too shy to call in to actually talk to me or my guests. So if you have any questions about Tradecraft or anything cool like that for our guest today, leave that shit in the PAZNIA Radio Network chat so that I can read it to him and bother him with your inane questions that we both already know the answers to. You're the most basic. You have barely 2 brain cells to rub together to write this question. We really appreciate your support. The call-in link this week is PAZNIA.com/call2, which you can call in a mere half hour from now, because before we get into the news today and the Vonu Life 2025 special stuff, I have to do our guest interview first, because this is a busy man, a VIP. He's jet setting around the world, and he has to hop on a plane to the Philippines, or some about a child brothel or something. I didn't really pay too close attention. I try not to overhear things that I don't need to hear. We welcome our most illustrious guest early this episode. He's a guy named Cory Hughes. How's it going, Cory?
Good. So I think I'm on the wrong show, because I'm here to talk about Bitcoin Core version 30. What are you here to talk about?
Well, my guests do ask me about things like that, and then I just go like, oh yeah, I don't know, I don't really care.
Oh my God. So I don't know. You're obviously a Bitcoin guy. Bitcoin Core V30 is like the most insidious, subtle attack I've ever seen on Bitcoin, next to the block wars, of course.
Yeah, so I've heard. Yeah, I mean, that it is relevant. The show's about privacy and security in a holistic sense. So like cryptocurrency comes up often.
So most people don't know this, but I spent like 2.5 years working for Saifedean Ammous, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard. So my days in Bitcoin go back to like 2015.
Oh, that's cool.
I launched in 2016 what had become at the time the biggest Bitcoin podcast network in the world. I had Tone Vase, Jimmy Song, World Crypto Network, Ansel Lindner, Saifedean. I had everybody who was everybody in the Bitcoin space. Then I realized I spent all my Bitcoin trying to run a business that wasn't making any money. And so I got the hell out of that. So, but yeah, I've been in the Bitcoin space a real long time, and it's a very interesting time in Bitcoin. So,
well, shit. Well, tell the listeners who you are besides the Bitcoin thing.
Yeah, sure. My name's Cory Hughes. I'm a Kennedy assassination researcher. And that's pretty much it. Everything else is secondary.
Right. Everything else is secondary. Well, because you're a Kennedy assassination research expert, or whatever the hell you said, I've heard tell that you know about this little thing we call Tradecraft in the spy world, which is basically the same shit we talk about on this show all the time.
Well, I try, but it's very hard to become an expert at something so secretive.
Yeah,
all we can kind of pick up on is the remnants of what they leave behind in history. You know, like all through Oswald's life, and the entire Kennedy assassination is just dripping with Tradecraft. And because on the day of the assassination, like virtually nobody's where they said they were. You know,
right.
So
we'll definitely touch on the sort of the normal, I guess, if we have time for it towards the end stuff, because I know you've talked to Rayo too a lot on the Vonu podcast about the Kennedy assassination and Kerry Thornley and stuff, and I'd certainly like to talk about that at some point. But you can use that as your canvas for I don't know, because I want to learn here. I want our listeners to learn from the spooks, and we can even use that as a learning thing. But anyway, so what do you think about what you know about CIA Tradecraft, how that's relevant to somebody's privacy or whatever, who wants to be a mall ninja?
Well, I think it's kind of important to define what Tradecraft really is. And Tradecraft are basically ways and means and techniques that spies have come up with in order to hide their activities and maintain what they call plausible deniability. And plausible deniability is probably the single most important term in the entire spy world. governments need to be able to cover their tracks and obfuscate their trail of deception. And that is ultimately what Tradecraft governs. Tradecraft governs things like the body doubles, the aliases, dead drops, any techniques that spies would use to cover their tracks, basically. That's what Tradecraft is, and it's riddled in everything the government does, even modern diplomacy. So, the reason that you have virtually every embassy around the world where you have people who are allegedly just ambassadors, I promise you 100% of them are using false names and work for the CIA, right? That's exactly how it went in the 60s, and I'm confident that's still how it goes today. So maintaining this plausible deniability is like the utmost priority of the intelligence world and the reason they implement Tradecraft at all.
Yeah, that's right. And, there is a distinction to be made between plausible deniability and what we might even call, I don't even know what to call it, convincing deniability, believable deniability. There's a difference between plausible and convincing, right?
Yes, but like one of the things I say about like why they won't release any Kennedy documents is more about maintaining. Everyone knows the CIA killed Kennedy, right? Everybody knows that.
Right.
It's not even a question, right? But they still are able to maintain a level of plausible deniability. It might not be convincing, but it meets the definition of plausible deniability, right? And so I don't think they'll ever release anything ever that matters, because it will tarnish American prestige, right? It will show that, yes, they knew the whole time what happened. They've just been lying to everybody forever. And all the lone gunman stuff has been crap, right? And so they have to maintain that forever. They can't ever say, oops, sorry, right? So that's
some
why
of it may have been destroyed anyway.
Yeah, and most of it wasn't ever on paper. The guy is planning of the actual assassination itself, and these guys had maps and diagrams of Dealey Plaza and all that stuff. I mean, none of that's going to turn up in any government document, And then one thing I realized is that most people who are clamoring for new documents, like, I don't give a damn about new documents. There has not been a single page of anything relevant to be released in any of the document releases since 2017 that we've gotten. None of those hundreds of thousands of pages have had anything in it.
That sounds about right, yeah.
It's been a complete and total waste of time.
Now, let's talk first. I'm going to start trying to mine you for data here, okay? That might be practical to the listeners. Now, let's talk about, in our world, we call it threat models. For the CIA, it might just be a matter of different roles and operations. How do you know what I'm talking about here when I say like threat modeling?
Not particularly.
Oh, well, it just means like what you're doing. Like, let's say your Tradecraft will fit your role or your operation, depending on who you're. Well, for example, like whether you're trying to achieve mere plausible deniability versus something convincing, right? How do you understand? Do you know anything about how, like a spy or a spy's handler would assess a situation to determine, I don't know, what kinds of Tradecraft would be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't have an answer for you. I can look at specific examples, like within Kennedy, of identity transfer, where people were saying they were places where they were not, right? So one part of the story is David Ferry, one of the guys down in New Orleans, allegedly has an alibi why he wasn't in Dallas. He went ice skating and did a whole bunch of stuff over the weekend. Well, even his alibi where he was supposed to have been wasn't him. Somebody went and impersonated him, gave his name, completely not matching his descriptors or any of that stuff. So that had to be planned at some level, right? At some point in time, they made a decision that this person would go and impersonate David Ferry at the ice skating rink, right? And so I don't see, one thing I noticed about in Kennedy in particular is that a lot of the decision-making process was offloaded to these guys who were not like big shots in the CIA. You know what I mean? They actually allowed these guys to have a lot of freedom in doing their, Kerry Thornley, heavily involved in the setup of Lee Harvey Oswald. So he obviously was told, hey, go out and set up Oswald. And you have, he I believe was left to, figure out his own parameters on what he was doing, because he went above and beyond in certain places where he never needed to go. He went and set up Oswald in places that never made it into the official story, that outright contradict the official story, right? So he was given a lot of operational leeway to do what he felt he had to do. So yeah, it's interesting because I think the person who's making that decision will probably be the operative themselves as opposed to a handler, because they know the situation more intimately.
Yes, yeah. That's something interesting I've noticed in both intelligence and insurgency is how they've been forced to adopt the power of decentralization. And it's kind of similar to the economic calculation problem, where the information required is decentralized, but also it helps with, privacy, because there's more, the handlers or whatever may not even know all the details of what's happening. Now, I noticed you used the term identity transfer. Does that apply just to like a body double situation, or is that a more abstract?
I believe it encompasses the use of aliases also. There's a number of there's a couple guys who are French mafia, Corsican mafia, whose names come up in the story. Michael Roux and Lucien Sarti and a couple other guys. They're different people, but they all share identities. They're all spies and they all share each other's identity, right? So even though it's just an alias thing, I believe that's an identity transfer operation. Whereas compared to something more extreme, I put out a book called Lee Harvey Oswald in Black and White, which basically goes over with a fine-tooth comb all the documents from Lee Harvey Oswald's early life up until he joins the Marines. And when you go through that stuff, it becomes brutally obvious that they were raising two children under the name Lee Harvey Oswald, obviously for intelligence purposes, right? That's an operation that lasted his whole life throughout the Marines, right? Which means the Marines were in on it. Marine G2 is the intelligence organization. And we have documents from Marine G2, which indicate the person they were handling was named Harvey Lee Oswald, not Lee Harvey Oswald, right? And so that was a much more extreme, I think, experimental identity transfer program that Lee Harvey Oswald was in, compared to something as small as just sharing an alias. But all of these, I believe, are identity transfer operations because you have one person basically pretending to be another.
Yeah, any kind of Dread Pirate Roberts situation, shared identity, I get it. That's a cool name. A cool term. I'm gonna have to use that. Now, how about what's your knowledge on appearing to be something you're not physically, like whether that be camouflage, disguises, or just looking boring?
Okay, so this is an interesting thing because most of the time you don't have identical doppelgangers who are doing identity transfer, right? So one thing I found was that a lot of times it appears as though the CIA groups guys together. Like when you look at all the guys who ended up surrounding David Ferrie and his little clique, they were all like 5'11", 160 pounds, brown hair, receding hairline, right? Like you got the very same descriptors over all these guys. So I think that's part of it. But one thing that the CIA is a book. God, I always forget the name of this book. It's like the CIA's dirty tricks or how they do them or something like that. And there's a section on identity transfer, and it talks about how when the two people, if the man who's being impersonated and the person doing the impersonation, if they're not in the same place at the same time and they're not heavily scrutinized, it makes pulling off an identity transfer operation much easier. Like, for example, Oswald, in the lead up to the assassination, there's like 100 witnesses who put Oswald everywhere from New Orleans to Timbuktu, saying New Orleans, this guy came in and he was talking about communism. He was talking about Kennedy. He was talking about having guns, right? And so a lot of the incidents of Oswald being set up were actually done by Kerry Thornley. And so you can see Kerry Thornley and Oswald are similar in appearance, but they're not exactly the same. They both are about the same, roughly the same height, 5'9" versus 5'10", receding hairline, very similar build, right? And so you have a bunch of places where Kerry Thornley clearly impersonated Oswald, but later on, months later, when they happen to see the guy on TV who kind of looked, hey, was that guy I saw 3 months ago, right? Because if you met someone today and you didn't see him again for 3 months and then they're on TV, odds are you wouldn't recognize them. But if that same person comes in and they're talking about guns and communism and all the things relevant to the Kennedy assassination months before the Kennedy assassination, once that guy gets busted and he's on television, you're gonna be like, hey, I think that's that guy I saw who talked about communism and the president, right? That is like a modus operandi that they did like for like at least 6 months before the assassination. Oswald going places, well, mostly Kerry Thornley and William Seymour were the two men impersonating Oswald. And they didn't look exactly like Oswald. They were similar in features, but when not put next to each other, not scrutinized enough for people to be able to realize there was a difference. And that's kind of how they pulled it off. So the visual appearance was not as important as a lot of people might think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is something I've touched on before, that people's memories are not super perfect or anything. Like it's pretty hard to.
It's easy to manipulate.
Yeah,
and that's what they were doing. They intentionally went out and planted stories that they knew once the assassination happened, these people would be calling in saying, "Hey, I interacted with this guy." Right. So the best example of that is Kerry Thornley with Marina went to go to Baton Rouge to get an apartment, to look at an apartment. And when he's in there, the guy basically tells the whole story. I was in Russia and I'm a communist, and he had to explain what communism was. And he said, "Is this place secure? I got a rifle collection. I don't want stolen." And then he made comments about Kennedy. Like he laid out the whole damn thing. And so obviously she called up after the assassination, was like, "Hey, Oswald came and did this," but it wasn't Oswald, could never have been Oswald, And then when you realize it was Kerry Thornley setting him up everywhere, like, oh, I see what they were doing here, and Kerry Thornley did that in a lot of places.
Are you aware of any sudden change of clothing or disguise being used in these scenarios?
Well, the clothing becomes important for a number of different reasons. So it's very important to note that on the day Oswald got arrested on the 22nd, he's wearing a white T-shirt and he's got like a brown kind of patterned long sleeve button-up shirt over it. Okay, so that becomes super important because when you look at a lot of the Oswald sightings that day, even within the book depository, that description goes right out the window, and you end up with like William Seymour. I don't believe Oswald worked at the book depository. I don't have any evidence Oswald was there. And I've even got a statement from the district attorney, Wade, that Oswald denied ever being in the building. So I believe the person who was actually working at the book depository impersonating Oswald was a man named William Seymour. I do have photographs of him in Dealey Plaza from the Robert Hughes film, and a man matching that exact description being stopped inside the building. And so when you start to look at some of the different things related to Oswald on the 22nd, you'll find that he's not wearing the clothes that he's supposed to be wearing, right? We have Oswald allegedly at the Top 10 record store buying tickets to the Dick Clark show when Oswald's supposed to be at work. Then we have Oswald later on at the Jiffy store where he buys Pico Brittle and beer. And the clerk was like, that's a weird combination. And so brittle? It's like a peanut brittle. It's like, okay. Yeah, it's some peanuts and like some caramel shit. It's some old gross shit from the 50s. And so, yeah, so you got Oswald appearing all over the place, not wearing the clothing that he's supposed to be wearing, not even being at the book depository. So the clothing descriptors become very important, particularly because Oswald was supposed to have that dark brown shirt, but a lot of the witnesses saw him wearing a light brown garment, either a shirt or a jacket. And that becomes very problematic for people who believe that Oswald was ever at the book depository that day.
Yeah, this can work the other way around too. Like if you are the same person, but your clothes change, that can throw people off too.
Yeah, we don't really have an incident of that. The only incident we have of any kind of thing like that is, so allegedly Oswald flees from the book depository, goes to his boarding house, and he has to get his jacket and his gun, and then he goes to the movie theater. But the problem is that Oswald allegedly wore a jacket into the book depository, but why did he not take his jacket with him when he left? He specifically had to go there to get the jacket. Doesn't make any sense, right? So, but it was obviously Kerry Thornley, and that leads us right to the Tippit shooting, where Kerry Thornley was involved with the Tippit shooting, not Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald was already in the theater by that point.
Now, what about carrying stuff, concealing stuff, hiding stuff on your person? Did this come up in any way?
Not really. So the only thing I can think of in regards to like concealing anything or stories of Oswald concealing stuff is Oswald allegedly walked in the book depository with the package containing he told Bill Frazier allegedly that it was curtain rods. But this is how he's supposed to have gotten the gun into the building that day. But that incident never actually happened. So, but that's the only real incident of anyone actually trying to conceal anything. It's a stupid story. Like once you come to understand,
they just lied about it happening.
Yeah, pretty much. So Bill Frazier is. You have to understand the context of the book depository, because the book depository, while not specifically a CIA front, number one, the CIA controls the textbook industry in this country. Like that's where the narrative starts, with propagandizing kids in school. Period. Like Macmillan and a whole bunch of McGraw-Hill, all of these got CIA ties going back to their origins. So the Texas School Book Depository had 4 different publishers in it. The Scott Forsman Company, the Southwest Publishing Company, all of these are CIA textbook publishing companies, right? So you have to understand the people inside the building were probably just regular employees, not necessarily working for the CIA. This is a business that is entrenched in the Central Intelligence Agency. And so the guy who ran the Texas School Book Depository was a guy named Jack Kaysen. His name never comes up anywhere. He's never even on lists of people who are employed at the building. But he was the owner of the business, and he was the head. He was only there till 12:10 that morning, which is very important. But he was the head of the American Legion in Dallas, and the American Legion had members of the FBI, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence world, and I believe that's his inroad to this whole thing. That's Jack Kaysen's inroad to the conspiracy, his connections through the American Legion. But I forget my point. What was the question?
Oh, I was just asking about carrying, concealing things, but you didn't really have anything on that. How about shelter? Things like safe houses or where people were staying. Did that come up?
So there's some interesting. Yeah, there's a couple of places. So within the Daltex, which is the building across Houston Street from the book depository, you've got a number of people who were arrested out of that building. And all of them gave the excuse that they were going to the 3rd floor to use the phone. There's no phone on the 3rd floor, okay? So all these people who got caught and arrested gave the same reason they were there, to use the phone on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor contained what was called the Maryland Belt Company. In order to use the phone, you had to walk in through a double set of swivel doors, because it was like a manufacturing plant. And then the phone was like on the wall on the left. So that story that all 3 of them gave is bogus. It was either bogus and they were told to give that story, or the Maryland Belt Company was actually a safe house that they were supposed to go to if things got hot outside. You know what I mean? So one of the 2 things happened there. Then you have there's an alleged safe house that was run by Tammy True, who worked for Jack Ruby. That one is not really much information on, but allegedly it backed up to the other boarding house and was connected through an alley. So there's some shenanigans going on there. And then there was another house that was confirmed to have about a half a dozen of these like anti-Castro Cuban types living in. I think it was on Harlandale. And that house, the day of the assassination, everybody vacated and moved out. But I don't think that has any relevance whatsoever. I think they did a lot of stuff in Dallas that led false trails. Like the anti-Castro Cubans, people think had something to do with the assassination, had nothing to do with it. Zero, like not at all. It's a rhetoric. But it didn't change the fact that they had a bunch of Cubans in a house for about a week before the assassination. So I think they did things like that to throw off the trail. You know, they flew a lot of people into Dealey Plaza, into Dallas that week that shouldn't have been there. A bunch of mob guys, a bunch of French mobsters, all kinds of people were in Dallas that week that shouldn't have been.
Do you think those were real commies that happened to be have CIA ties or something like that, or were they just totally AstroTurf?
Oh, totally AstroTurf, yeah, for sure. So I'm completely of the belief that they flooded Dallas with all kinds of people to keep investigators kind of guessing. Because if the FBI is doing a research and they, figure out that there's a whole bunch of mafia people in Dealey Plaza, I mean, that's kind of sending a message, to either back off or whatever, which I think is what they did. They did the same thing in Mexico City. They sent a bunch of people named Oswald to Mexico City the same time that our Oswald was supposed to be there. One of them was Naval Intelligence. His name was spelled OSSWALD. and the exact dates Oswald was alleged to have been in Mexico City, they sent this guy down there to hand out anti-communist flyers on college campuses. So what happens? The FBI figures this out and they go interview him. Now they got two Oswalds walking around Mexico City at the same time, right? So like, this is the kind of shit the CIA does.
Yeah, that's cool. That is a learning opportunity for me. Now, what were you saying about these two backed up boarding houses with the alleyway between them? What's going on there?
Yeah, so 1026 North Beckley is where Oswald allegedly lived, but he never lived there, okay? Ruth Payne told at least a half a dozen people Oswald lived with her and his wife. And then the story changed about a week after the assassination that he lived at these boarding houses. So the boarding houses are total red herrings in as far as, did Oswald ever stay at any of them? No, he never did. But this house that was allegedly, I hope I'm not mixing stories, owned by Tammy True, who was a dancer for Jack Ruby. Allegedly, she had some Cubans who were staying with her. And this building, if I'm not mistaken, connected to that 1026 North Beckley. It was only 2 or 3 houses down, and it connected through an alley. So there's all the CIA, like they have a vast real estate network. This becomes obvious in a lot of places. And Oak Cliff was one of them. There's actually in the Clay Shaw documents a list of about 9 addresses in Oak Cliff, all within a couple blocks of each other, that Jim Garrison had confirmed were all connected to intelligence people. So they buy up chunks of real estate, so it's not that difficult for them to have 2 safe houses in the same spot.
Yeah, okay. Did hiding spots ever come up in your research? Hiding stuff, like objects?
No, actually not really.
Okay, how about drops?
No, nothing like that. Let me just comment on some of the objects and stuff. I'll talk real briefly about Oswald's personal possessions. So the 1026 North Beckley boarding house is where they get all the evidence against Oswald, but only around 250 pieces of evidence were actually collected from there by the Dallas police. All that stuff was taken by the FBI, and then when they returned it, there were over 450 pieces of evidence. So somehow 200 pieces of evidence mysteriously got injected into Oswald's personal belongings. And some of them actually were turned out to be like fake documents that the FBI had manufactured. Some weird stuff. Like, I don't personally have any of my tax documents from 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. It's like, who keeps that shit? But Oswald, believe it or not, allegedly had W-2s and tax documents going all the way back to like 1953 with him in his personal possessions. Like, nobody has that shit, period. But he did. And then John Armstrong did the research into these documents, and he found a lot of them were fakes, like straight up manufactured, not with Oswald's handwriting, and totally just contrary to everything that was collected. So they manufactured a lot of evidence against Oswald, including like money order for the rifle and all that stuff. Anything that's like, that's weird, is probably fake. So, but yeah, as far as items go, they faked a whole ton of stuff.
All right. Now, this one is something that unfortunately does not come up in the spy world as much as it does in the movies and the video games. But did anyone in your research ever have to physically sneak around, avoid being seen or heard?
Well, that's an interesting question. I can't think of an example where anyone had to sneak like that in particular. However, I will say, and this kind of includes the identity transfer stuff, Jack Ruby in particular, when you go through the film record, he got himself on television like 4 times over the weekend leading up to the shooting of Oswald. It's a little suspicious, don't you think, that he got on TV so many times?
Yes.
Well, when you dig into the Jack Ruby story, it turns out he had a nearly identical brother named Samuel Ruby. And so almost all of the official story stuff on Jack Ruby for where he was on the day of the assassination and throughout the weekend, most of those activities are not Jack Ruby. They were his brother Samuel, starting right after the assassination, actually before the assassination. So the official story is that Jack Ruby was at the Dallas Morning News, where he gets there about 11 o'clock and he stays there till about 1 o'clock. And he's just hanging around and he's talking to people, and there's no reason for him to really be there, but he's there for 2 hours. It's confirmable that there was someone using the name Jack Ruby who was in that office for 2 hours. The problem is the real Jack Ruby was out on the street doing stuff, being seen driving the green pickup truck. Then he was out on the street with a guy named Vanderslice, who provided statements to the FBI. And ultimately what it turns out is that Jack Ruby ends up going to Galveston to do some stuff down there on that Saturday, the next day, before making it back Sunday evening or Sunday early in the morning before he shoots Oswald. And all the images that you see of Jack Ruby in the Dallas Morning News or in the hallway at the police department or the midnight press conference, not a single one of those is Jack Ruby. That's Jack's brother, Samuel. So they did that intentionally so Jack Ruby could go to Galveston, because Jack going to Galveston is not in the official story, but he had to go because he had to bring someone back to their boat, and that was at the harbor. And so, yeah, you could say that everything Jack did that weekend was him sneaking around, while Samuel was back in Dallas, leaving very visible alibis for him.
What's the deal with the boat?
So there's a story involving a woman named Rose Sheremy. I don't know if you've ever seen the Kennedy JFK movie from Oliver Stone, but it's like the opening scene. They show this woman getting thrown out of a car. And basically she tells everyone in the hospital that they're going to kill Kennedy. They're going to kill Kennedy. And everyone's like, yeah, you're crazy. And they throw her in like the mental bin in a straitjacket for the weekend. And then once Kennedy gets killed, they're like, oh my God, she was right. So they call in the cavalry, right? And then they do this big investigation. And it turns out that Rose Sheremy was actually left from New Orleans on her way to Dallas with two guys, Sergio Arcacha and Emilio Santana. And they will go on after they Oliver Stone's interpretation of what happened was wrong. She basically was a total bitch, and she got thrown out of the bar they were in, and they hit by a car. And then they end up going to Dallas to participate in the assassination, just like she told them. And but the whole reason that they were in that area was because they had to stop at Galveston first, because they were meeting this seaman who came in on a boat, and he was supposed to be bringing a bunch of heroin. And so they do a whole investigation into this guy. They never mentioned his name in the document. Turns out it's a guy named Andrew Blackman, who was an associate of David Ferrie, who was bringing heroin in. The proof for this lies in a whole bunch of documents that are in the David Ferrie file. But he comes in, and I believe he was the guy who was the railroad man who assisted the shooter up on the knoll, David Ferrie, because that's inner circle guys. He's the only guy in the cast of characters who's about 6'2", 6'3". And so all the pieces for me fell into place that the guy who came in on the boat was Andrew Blackman. And this also makes sense in regards to Jack Ruby having to bring him back to the boat, because Blackman gets back to his boat on Monday, and he's interrogated by everyone, the FBI and Secret Service, on Tuesday. And so that's why that boat story is important.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, do you know anything in your research about trashing stuff, having to get rid of something? Well, let's say evidence, for example.
Okay, so not in particular, and as far as any one particular item. Well, we can go into the magic bullet. The magic bullet is fake. So the magic bullet, allegedly this Carcana round that hit it's made 7 injuries in Kennedy and Connolly and all that stuff, and then it's found in pristine condition. That was an evidence swap. So that bullet that everyone sees and is called the magic bullet, which is basically undamaged, that's more of a prop, because the actual bullet that was found at the hospital was fired from an Enfield 303. It had a pointed tip on it, but it goes through the chain of command. And then years later, the FBI will send agents back to interview the two guys, Daryl Tomlinson and O.P. Wright, the two guys who found the bullet. FBI will interview them, and they'll be like, that's not the bullet. All right. And so the whole story about the magic bullet and whether or not it shot anybody has been the biggest red herring to the public that has ever been in Kennedy. And so that's one example of that. But other than that, I would say, as far as destruction of evidence goes, this is where the early life of Oswald comes in. The early life of Oswald, basically the vast majority of documents we need about Oswald's life, including all the Marine stuff, most of that is missing. Intentionally hidden by Naval Intelligence, Marine G2, Defense Intelligence Agency. All these different intelligence agencies knew that Oswald was part of some identity transfer operation growing up. So, but yeah, the documents are like the biggest, things that were outright destroyed.
All right. Now, I know that the Kennedy thing's your big obsession, and that happened in the mid-20th century, but you're also a cryptocurrency guy. So I'll try my luck here. Are you familiar with digital tradecraft in any way? Gizmos, technology, digital.
Not so much, no.
Yeah, okay.
You have to give me 1 second. I got to let my dog out real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go on.
He's letting out the dog, folks.
Sorry about that. No, I'm not too familiar with any of the digital spy stuff of today.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's detour into cryptocurrency a little bit. Let's
Sure.
talk to us a bit about your cryptocurrency thing.
I got involved with crypto back in 2015, 2016. And by 2018, I had made a ton of money and started my own crypto podcast business. I worked with all the big names in Bitcoin back in the day. And then I got flushed out in the big crash of like 19 or 20 or whenever it was. But recently we launched our own cryptocurrency project, actually, in July. We launched a token called Independent Media Token, which is basically a venture capital fund for independent media. So we're still in the early phases of that, but that's up and off the ground.
It's like a DAO?
No, it's a fund. It's like a VC fund for crypto. So we have a 1% tax on our transactions, which fills a fund, and then we distribute tokens to independent media projects. We've already funded about 20 different shows so far, and we've had a bunch of meetings with some much bigger shows, and we have a bunch of more meetings coming up. So yeah,
and then,
so
people are using the token for transactions, and then you're taking a transaction fee to fund independent media. So what kinds of transactions are you encouraging or marketing with the token?
Oh, it doesn't matter. We get a 1% off of everything that happens.
Okay. So what do you find people are using it for?
Just trading, obviously. Right now it's just trading. Most people think that, so once upon a time, when you go back and you come to understand the different phases of crypto, you have Bitcoin launches. And so then from there on out, for years, every project that came out was like a layer one. It was like a base layer, and most people just forked Bitcoin and changed it. You know, that's where you get Litecoin and all this stuff. And then you had like Monero come out with ring signatures, which was interesting. Not as functional as they'd like, but it's still good. And then you have Ethereum comes out and kind of opened up the door to a million scams. So it's kind of unfortunate because I understand what Ethereum's concept was, but once the ability to launch tokens of your own came out and not have to have the investment in the infrastructure, a lot of people took advantage of that system and just launched a bunch of scams, you know. And then you have like Solana came out in the last couple of years, which is like from an infrastructure perspective, probably the best blockchain there is, if you even want to call it a blockchain, because it really functions as like multiple blockchains at once, which is kind of interesting. So over the years, the space has changed a lot. And so once upon a time, people thought, well, this token has to function in a certain way for it to have some kind of value, or it has to have utility, right? Or it works as a gatekeeper to a certain product or something like that. But one thing I really realized over the years is that the single best implementation and use case for tokens is really more of a stock, or not something that necessarily does anything in particular other than like our project funds independent media through a 1% tax. People who get involved will see the benefit of that and want to support independent media, and therefore token price goes up, right? So that's how our system works. I believe it functions more of a stock than it does a utility, but that's just my opinion. But the future of the space is very interesting. There's a lot of new projects, like Aster that does like and Hemi that do and Hyper that do like on-chain trading, which is pretty interesting. There's a lot of new stuff coming out that's very interesting, but overall the market kind of sucks right now. Like it really does. The market is struggling to regain. Overall, yeah, it's struggling to regain where it was a year ago. You know, so everything that happened in the last year is pretty much irrelevant, just got wiped out. And I anticipate the market's going to go a whole lot lower, which I think is great, because it's inevitable that Bitcoin's going to multi-millions. I mean, just from basically its basic use case alone, once more people really understand what it is, you know, more people will buy into it. 90% of people buying crypto don't understand anything about it, what they do or anything. They're basically just playing Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's lots of speculation-driven bubbles on top of the like long-term trend.
Right. And so we
Have you
launched our
thought
token. Go ahead.
with your independent media token? Have you thought about like maybe using the token to monetize independent media distribution in some way, if you know what I mean?
Well, we've looked at all the different models of things like that, and when we looked at things that came out like the Ray token, what did Ray come out for? What was that platform? God, I can never remember what it's called. Rockfin. Okay, so Rockfin comes out, and they have their Ray token, and they were kind of doomed from the start because the only purpose of that token was to pay people who were putting on content. So it didn't benefit the average person. Like nobody out there was like, oh, this is going to go to the moon because it's paying a bunch of people. So if you create a token simply to pay people, like they did in Rockfin, it's a guaranteed failure. And then they came up with some like crazy halving that they didn't have to do. You know, there's no need to have the token cycle. And so they came out with that. And then that just destroyed everything. Now the token's dead and they switched to USDC. So those kind of models I find just are not self-sustaining. People need to see something bigger. And in this day and age with the overt censorship of independent media, there's a ton of people who just want to support independent media. And so that's where a lot of the people who've been buying our token are coming from, people who see the vision that we have, right? Okay. But we got a long ways to go. I mean, we have basically a 10-year plan, and we're only into it by 6 months. So,
okay, that's interesting. Well, speaking of payments, in your research with CIA Tradecraft, do payments come up in any way, or payment processing?
Well, there's obvious money flows. So there was a company called Permindex. It was basically just a spook organization. It was like a subset of the CIA and the Mossad. And a lot of them, it is kind of it appears as though, I don't know how to say it because there's really not much proof of this, but when you kind of understand the hierarchy of the assassination, you can tell which factions within the assassination were responsible for money, right? And so Permindex clearly was a money funneling organization, and they funneled money through a company called Centre Mondial Commercial out of Montreal. And then where that money from Montreal went, who knows, right? We don't have any records of these people getting payoffs and stuff like that. As far as that goes, there's only rumor and speculation. But that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much it in as far as how any kind of money transfers would have worked within the assassination.
How about phone calls, phone networks?
This is an interesting one. So back in the day, phone numbers, instead of having like an area code and then like 3 digits and 4 digits, they had like a 2-letter. It was 2 letters and then 5 numbers, and the letters corresponded to numbers. But that's how they did it. So when you go through the records, you'll find a ton of phone numbers with that old extension. Most of them in the story have that old extension. And a lot of them in the files are listed as unidentified, which is pretty crazy to think they couldn't identify numbers even back then. But thank God for Google and AI today, because a lot of those old phone numbers are very easily traceable using modern technology. One of the biggest ones, so part of the story is David Ferry, who was one of the shooters, he used this alibi that he was in Houston at this ice skating rink. And when you look into that whole series of events, you'll find a document that shows the phone calls that were listed from the motel that they stayed at. All of them are identified except for one. Well, I ended up identifying that number. I ran it through Google, and it came back. It came up in an advertisement from like the late 50s or early 50s or early 60s for a place called the Gateway Swim and Skate. And so then when you dig into the Gateway Swim and Skate, that ends up opening up a whole another aspect of assassination research that no one had ever tackled before. And it was basically revealed through a simple phone number, that really should have been identified many years ago.
Oh, good job.
So that's the most interesting thing about the phone numbers, because there's a whole ton more. There is actually another, I got to dig this one up. There's about a 25-page document that has like fine print of all the phone numbers that were in the assassination from, Jack Ruby or David Ferry or somebody calling who. I need to revisit that greatly, because there is a ton of unidentified numbers in there that I never actually got into trying to identify. So
Yeah,
hope I answered your question. Yeah, I guarantee I will. I guarantee. And so when you get people who aren't supposed to know each other, who are calling the same person, it's like, okay, you're both lying. You knew each other, right? So things like that become pretty obvious, especially with the relationships in New Orleans. Right, exactly. They didn't have any concept of metadata back in the day. Like
in their own way, they did.
Well, it's so funny because
didn't call it that.
So many of these guys and so many of the actions that they took, they literally thought would just disappear to history. Like none of these guys, none of the smartest guys of their day could envision something like the internet, where I could literally right now go and probably spend 2 weeks digging through data just on Alan Dulles and his life and his personal life and all that stuff that he would never think that anyone could ever know about him. You know, none of these guys could envision anything like that. And fortunately, the digital age has pretty much made it easier to debunk a lot of their stories. You know, who knows what we're going to have in 20 years?
Boomers or whatever, maybe even older than boomers, actually, given the time.
Yeah.
Because, like, I mean, shit, people still today do that. Like, it was like last month or something. It came out that you could just look it up on Google Insights or whatever, and see that like there were a bunch of searches being done from Israel related to the Charlie Kirk thing before it happened.
Yes.
So they're just a bunch of dumb boomers.
It is wild because like it seems like when you think you got all your bases covered, the internet got you somehow. You know.
I mean, all the fuck they had to do was use a VPN. Like how
I know, right?
To be miscaught.
So like I think that them being this like elite intelligence agency is like total
whatever
propaganda.
Google's our friend anyway, but they still they still show everyone the data, but all right, so what about other kinds of communications besides phone calls? Is that coming up? Anyone slipping up with other kinds of communications, written communications maybe, or anything else?
Not that I can think of offhand. We don't have any records of any like, you know, hidden messages that were found or nothing like that. So I have to think that back in the day, private messages probably were probably sent through newspaper classified ads and stuff like that.
Right.
Very basic stuff that anybody could, you know, any spook could go pick up a paper and go to the classified ad and see what code is written in there and knows what you got to do. I think that stuff probably happened a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. They do that stuff on the internet too now. There's all kinds of stuff like that, numbers, stations. Speaking of which, how about radio transmissions? Has that come up in your research?
Well, there's a lot of radio stuff that came up, but nothing in radio transmission specifically. But for some reason, I dug heavily into the radio stations like WSHO and WDSU in New Orleans because those had intelligence connections. And in doing so, I ended up stumbling across a radio history archive that told some like more personal history of some of these radio stations. Very interesting stuff, particularly surrounding WSHO, which is one of the phone calls that was made to New Orleans from the hotel next to the ice skating rink. And so one thing I kind of started to pick up on was that the CIA tried to buy a lot of radio stations, a whole bunch in the 50s and 60s. And I kind of at the same time came across a bunch of people who had private radio licenses. People in the story had private radio licenses issued to them, meaning they could get some kind of ham radio or something like that and be broadcasting it and be licensed to do so. I never understood that, but I kind of felt like that would be one hell of a way for people to communicate off the phone lines, you know, from hundreds of miles away. So it did pique my interest at that time. It's just something I never revisited.
Yeah, okay. Now let's talk about the financial side of things in a different way. Did you come up with in your research people having cover jobs or having to separate their intelligence payroll from whatever they were actually supposed to be doing for work?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, most certainly. One example I'll give you is that Jack Valenti is one of the most important people in the assassination story. He's just supposed to be just like an advertising executive in Houston, owning his own multi-million-dollar firm called Weekly and Valenti, which had actually handled Kennedy's 1960 campaign, Johnson's campaigns going back to before that, to like 56, I think. And so you have Jack Valenti, who is just supposed to be a friend of Lyndon Johnson, and he's an ad guy, period. That's supposed to be him. However, I have a document that showed when Valenti ends up taking the job on November 22nd as Lyndon Johnson's right-hand man in the White House, Walter Jenkins had sent a memo basically explaining that Johnson had to transfer several people who were employed in federal agencies over to the White House payroll. What the hell federal agency could Jack Valenti possibly be employed by while running a multi-million-dollar business in Houston? There's only one. There's only one, the CIA, right? So that document to me was like the icing on the cake that Jack Valenti was CIA, who definitely had a role in the assassination. And so other than that, I am convinced all of Oswald's jobs were front jobs. He gets back to, he works for Leslie Welding Company in the shipping department. Leslie Welding, the owner, had CIA connections. Then you go to Riley Coffee in New Orleans. Riley Coffee, not only was the owner former CIA, 4 of the guys who worked for Riley allegedly went to go work for NASA or Michaud or one of the other aerospace companies with no alleged background of working in aerospace. Why do they do that? These are front jobs, okay? These people are not aerospace techs. They're not baristas at a coffee shop. These are fake jobs that give these guys a paycheck, and then they're off doing whatever other spy stuff. This pops up a lot. A lot of people with no background seemingly went to go work in aerospace right around the time of the assassination.
Former. So, that's one of my favorite words in intelligence. Former.
Yeah, right. So Kerry Thornley in particular, Kerry Thornley at the time of the assassination was working at allegedly at some cafe in New Orleans. I can't remember the name offhand, but he doesn't have an alibi for the day of the assassination, and he is working the next day on Saturday when the Secret Service and the FBI and everybody comes for him. The problem I have with his job is that he was clearly in Dallas setting up Oswald going back to like early October. And so I don't know if he was bouncing back and forth between Dallas and New Orleans, but his job gives him an alibi for the week leading up to the assassination. At a time when I'm telling you the guy was in Dallas, not in New Orleans. So why is his job covering for him when he definitely wasn't there? That to me smells of an intelligence connection and another front job. Same thing with William Seymour, another guy involved in the assassination, and a company he allegedly worked at called Beach Welding in Miami. Beach Welding gives him alibis all through the month of October. And then at times when I can tell you with certainty, he was definitely in Dallas setting up Oswald at the gun range and a couple other places, pretending to be Oswald. And so you got Beach Welding covering for William Seymour, definitely. So that had to be some sort of front, right? I'm just convinced that the CIA has a huge network of people who can plug in employees and, like the mafia with a no-show job. I think it's pretty much the same thing. Probably just going back to their CIA loyalties,
Yeah, no, I mean, besides Seymour and Thornley, I mean, you were talking about Oswald's fake jobs. Which Oswald are we talking about? What about his sibling?
Well, that's a different story. That's a whole other conversation. That has no application post October of 59. If you're talking about the Oswald scheme, that appears to have ended in September 10th, 59, okay. Actually.
All right. Well, we're going to go to a break where robots are going to tell us jokes and other such entertaining things. And right after the break, you can call in if you want, PAZNIA.com/call2, where you can leave some messages in the chat and I'll read them to this guy. And we'll be back with Cory Hughes after this break.
You're listening to the PAZNIA Radio Network.
The most spectacular treasure in history. Developed over decades by cypherpunks across different continents. It was finally completed by a mysterious cypherpunk named Satoshi, whose keys were hidden somewhere in the digital realm. But he left clues for us hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to find them before the CIA discovered the treasure and its potential.
Keeping this treasure out of the hands of the spooks, Michael, is your destiny.
You're Bitcoin investors, aren't you?
We're more like Bitcoin savers, actually.
All his life, Michael Saylor searched for a thermodynamically sound asset no one believed existed.
Don't you get it, Michael? The asset is a myth.
I refuse to believe that.
But what he thought was the final clue was only the beginning.
It's hidden in plain sight. It's in Satoshi's white paper.
You think Satoshi's keys are encoded in the white paper?
It's a cipher.
And how do you know that, exactly?
We don't...
Is the cipher in the room with us? Right now?
But Michael Saylor isn't the only one who discovered the hidden treasure.
The CIA is working around the clock to crack the code. Hell, they might have already cracked it.
Now, he's in a race against time and against spooks to recover Satoshi's wallet before it's too late.
We have to get our hands on those keys and distribute Satoshi's coins to podcasters through fountain boosts before the CIA gets them.
The CIA gets them, and then what?
Everything Whitney Webb warned us about comes true.
Michael Saylor must unlock the secrets of game theory using first principles thinking and tap the Cyber Hornet brain trust of Bitcoin Twitter, group chats, and Bitcoin podcasts to save the world from being taken over by feds.
Try brute force. Tether is working with Langley. We might be too late.
Michael Saylor. National Treasure 3. Genesis Code.
Hey guys, Scott here for Liberty Under Attack Publications. Looking for a Liberty-focused publisher? Liberty Under Attack publishes books and strategy guides for individuals looking to increase their personal freedom. They assist authors through the entire publishing process: proofreading, editing, cover designs, paperback and Kindle formatting, and full audiobook narration and post-production. Tell them Scott sent you and get 20% off a full service deal. To get some one-of-a-kind books or for more information, visit libertyunderattack.com.
The following ad is presented by the Anti-Toxicity League, working tirelessly for a safer and less toxic world.
On January 20th, 2025, Elon Musk turned my life upside down when he did the Nazi salute in support of Donald Trump.
We had bought the Tesla because we wanted to virtue signal about the environment, and so that all our friends knew that we were liberals, not so that they would think we are Nazis.
If we had wanted to be Nazis, we would have bought a Volkswagen.
Now our friends have turned their backs on us. I was driving my Model 3 to Whole Foods yesterday, and my friend Clara flipped me off from her Nissan Leaf. The video cameras caught my husband's friend John rubbing his balls on the hood of the car.
Even though we have a Vote Democrat sticker on the bumper, people still think we are Nazis. We have tried so hard to not be Nazis, accepting our white privilege, virtue signaling for every possible cause on the left. Yet no matter how hard we have tried, our friends have turned on us because of our car.
It would seem that the only place we are accepted now is at Trump rallies and amongst the normal, uneducated Americans who don't have time to focus on irrelevant social causes.
We can't just change our friend group because of this. We don't want to hang out with people without college degrees, those who aren't focused on equality, those who refuse to state their pronouns, and conspiracy theorists who don't care about climate change.
That is why today, we are proud to say that we sold our Tesla because we aren't Nazis.
This decision proves that we don't support unelected officials auditing other unelected officials in the government.
It proves that we are willing to make brave decisions in the face of adversity in order to promote equity and inclusion in our communities, that we are willing to stand up against hate.
With this move, I hope that our friends will forgive us and the lady at Mimi's Cafe will stop spitting in my avocado toast.
Doing the right thing means that sometimes you have to stand out from the crowd and make hard decisions. Stand up against hate. Stand up for the government officials who have been laundering our tax dollars for a better world. Stand up for climate change, for the right to take your children to Drag Queen Story Hour. But more importantly, choose to be brave and to sell your Tesla.
My name is Fred Smith.
And my name is Janet Smith Schuster.
And we are choosing to stand up against hate.
Carl Watner, longtime proponent of a voluntary society, died last December. You may have seen his articles published on his website, voluntarist.com, in his newsletter, The Voluntarist, the Mises Institute, or elsewhere over the last 40 years. His newest book, I Must Speak Out, Volume 2, The Best of the Voluntarist, is now available via Liberty Under Attack Publications. This 430-page second volume spans the years of 2000 through 2020 and includes articles by Carl Watner, Hans Hermann Hoppe, Carl Hess, Benjamin Tucker, George H. Smith, Lysander Spooner, Pete Eyre, Joyce Brand, and many others. I Must Speak Out is for the newly initiated, the veteran voluntarist, or anywhere in between. Buy the book now at libertyunderattack.com/voluntarist. For more great content on building a voluntary society and for Carl's extensive archives, check out voluntarist.com.
And now, back to Cloak and Dagger with host Thane Riddle.
Hey Ray, how's it going? I hope you like the robot jokes. You got a comment. I don't know how relevant it is. In fact, what, were you going to say something about robot jokes, Clay?
No. I just caught the reference to Satoshi in there. Satoshi's Nick Szabo, if people haven't figured it out yet.
You
Not
think
the
it's Nick
CIA.
Szabo?
100%. There was only 3 people in the world that ever could have been: Y. Day, Hal Finney, and Nick Szabo, and 2 of them are dead. And even Y. Day said the only people in the world that could have done this were me and Nick Szabo. So it's definitely Nick. He's the only person who never turned over his communications with Satoshi, because there aren't any. So all the evidence in the world is there. So
I always kind of thought it was Adam Beck.
No, he created the proof of work algorithm, and the proof of work algorithm was mentioned in the white paper. But you got to remember, this all goes back to that
hash too. He applied
this all goes back to the cypherpunk mailing list. But it was Szabo's Bit Gold, which was actually the direct precursor. So
I see. So we have a comment. I don't know how relevant it is, but I'll read it for you anyway, because I like this guy. He says, "Hi, I have interest in making DIY explosives. Please buy 3D printers, everyone. How do I spot Fed posting?" Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that, Corey?
I don't.
Was there Fed posting in the 60s?
You know something? Operation Mockingbird, I guess all media was Fed posting.
Now that I got my DIY explosives, is there any narrative about the world that is totally fake? I mean, like flat Earth, moon landing, or Yetis. How much
I think
secret
everything
space
is
stuff
fake.
is going on? And how much is manned? Are they on Mars? This is an actual question. Thank you.
I don't know. I learned not to step out of my lane a long time ago.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's happened. There's a certain point where you become humbled by how many things you're wrong about.
Yes, yeah.
So
Like honestly,
everyone-
like aliens could land on the White House lawn tomorrow, and I don't have the emotional or mental energy to give a fuck. You know,
I wouldn't even believe they were aliens. That's for damn sure. Does anyone want to call? I feel like there's someone in the room skulking around. I don't know if they want to talk to you. But if anyone wants to call in, they can call PAZNIA.com/call2. You can talk to this beautiful, handsome boy. Cory Hughes, he's the number one boy, top boy. But in the meantime, I'll be continuing to bother him to try and extract. And I think we've been doing a good job where you clearly have some sort of monomania about the JFK assassination. I think we've actually been doing a good job learning from it. I feel like I've learned a couple practical things from it already.
Well, here's my problem with Kennedy research in general is that we have 5 million pages of documents, probably 4.5 million pages are junk. And out of the remaining 500,000 that aren't junk, all the goods are there. Like all the answers are there. Like we don't need any more documents. All the good stuff is there. Like, trust me, it's all there. It's all in my book. I explain the whole assassination based on the documents that we already have. And so that's my biggest point of frustration with the whole Kennedy world. Like this thing could have been solved like in the 70s. You know,
that's true.
Hell,
for any
Jim Garrison came really close.
Practically.
Jim Garrison came really close to solving this in 67 and 68. I mean, he had a very good idea of what happened. He just didn't have the proof, couldn't link things like we can today, you know?
Yeah, that's how it usually is. Yeah. Okay, how about this? Do you have anything in your research popping up of like a CIA asset needing to acquire goods that may look shady? So having to acquire goods.
So we have a couple of instances of the one that jumps to mind really is comes from a book by a mobster called Frank the Irishman Herein. And he basically wrote a book called I Heard You Paint Houses. I Heard You Paint Houses was mob speak for I heard you are a hitman. I heard you kill people. And so in that book, he describes going to meet with Tony Provenzano, who was like Tony Pro, who was like a big mob guy up in Jersey. And he tells him, I need you to go and meet with this guy and pick up this duffel bag. And then he takes the duffel bag and he goes and drives it to Baltimore. And there he meets with David Ferry and turns over this duffel bag that Herein says, hey, I was in the army. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know I had 3 rifles in a bag. And so that bag gets picked up by David Ferry in Baltimore before the assassination. I believe these were 3 of the rifles used in Dealey Plaza. A Mauser was found on the roof of the depository. A Mauser was found inside the depository. And I believe one of the other shooters got arrested in Dealey Plaza and they took off him the 3rd Mauser. So that is like the first one that really comes to mind. I know there's some other shenanigans with the rest of the weapons allegedly used, like the weapon allegedly used by Oswald, the rifle. Like he never ordered that rifle. The rifle was ordered with a fake money order. We know it's fake because it's got ink bleed through on it when real money orders of that era were done on card stock. And we don't have the original money order. All we have are alleged photocopies of it, right? So all of the weapon stuff surrounding Oswald, that's all fake too. They said that it was a fake trail to him. But those are really the only examples that come to mind.
Oh, okay. Now this has come up a few times already. Are there any other ways you can think of where CIA businesses, cutouts, or investments come up?
Well, the CIA definitely hides a lot of their activities through what appears legitimate businesses. Like I know for a while the CIA opened up a bunch of paint stores and paint shipping companies, obviously so they could smuggle stuff in the paint. Does this come up in the assassination at all? Hard to say, really. Guy Bannister ran an alleged private detective agency, and that was allegedly 544 Camp Street, and that was allegedly his business. However, he never really had any private investigation business at all. Virtually 100% of his business came from FBI and intelligence sources, CIA, naval intelligence, stuff like that. So that could kind of be considered, that can kind of be one example. But offhand, and the Trade Mart, of course, Clay Shaw worked as the head of the International Trade Mart. Now, the Trade Mart was supposed to be basically like an organization that fostered trade around the world. And there was a couple of them. Kennedy was on his way to speak at the Trade Mart in Dallas, owned by the same people, when he got killed. So, but the Trade Mart was really just a cover for CIA international dealings. I'm sure they did all kinds of money transfers and stuff like that. But as far as like actual known business, they're really not known to have conducted any at all.
Now, one of the most important things when it comes to hiding stuff is shutting the fuck up, the need to know basis. Now, where would you say they notably did well or poorly?
I think they did pretty well. I mean, it's 60 years after the assassination, and we don't really have any concrete statements that anyone actually made. David Ferry made the most egregious statements of all. If you want to link anyone, and if you want to blame anyone for running their mouth, like David Ferry had a party in September, mid-September, and a guy named Perry Russo was there. And Perry Russo told Jim Garrison that the whole meeting was about how to kill Kennedy and how to use triangulation of crossfire and how everyone has to have an alibi, right? And so this all came out in the 1967 trial of Clay Shaw in New Orleans. So the plotters themselves, David Ferry in particular, ran his mouth around people he probably shouldn't have been running his mouth around, But other than that, you got a lot of people. You have a lot of people who like gave alibis, and their alibis are just completely worthless, or they've been debunked, right? So you have a lot of people lying about where they were, so you can kind of figure out who was involved on some level by the lies they told, But and as far as like intimate details getting out, some of the best stuff came from like Thomas Beckham, who was like a CIA/mafia courier. They would send him places with money and documents or whatever. He basically testified to the HSCA, the House Committee on Assassinations in the 70s, that he had gone to a meeting with Vincent Marcello, Carlos Marcello's brother, and a couple other people, where they gave him some documents and money where he had to go deliver it to a Mr. Howard in Dallas. And Mr. Howard being Lawrence Howard, who I place as one of the shooters on the 6th floor. And he tells a very vivid story about meeting Mr. Howard, giving him the money and the documents, and Howard like freaking out, thinking like, this isn't enough, And so stuff like that, to me, that's probably one of the most damning confessions we've gotten from anybody, because it makes perfect sense and it lines up with the known characters who are already in the storyline. So it connects a whole bunch of dots. But there was never really anybody who like spilled the beans. You get some people like Johnson allegedly had some mistress, and allegedly she told about how they went to a party the night before where they planned to kill Kennedy. They had like J. Edgar Hoover and a whole bunch of people at the Murchison Mansion. That shit never happened. That's all lies. So you do got a lot of people coming up and spilling the beans on stuff that was definitely false. There's a bunch of people who came forward as shooters. Oh, I was a shooter. No, you weren't. Right. So you got a lot of that stuff too.
I take it at least some of that is like disinfo by the CIA.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Like the guy, like there's one person in Dealey Plaza who's like pumping an umbrella, somebody allegedly came forward and claimed to be that guy, but his story makes no sense at all. And I actually identified that guy, so he was totally lying. So they definitely sent people forth to give statements to claim to be certain people who they definitely were not.
Now, another really important thing that's just fucking the bread and butter of privacy is compartmentalization. Stop keeping things from being unlinked from each other. It could be different aliases, traveling different circles of people, etc. How's this come up for you in your research?
Can you repeat the question?
I don't know. Give me some bullshit about compartmentalization. Like through, let's say, the same person trying to be different people with different aliases.
Well, I think the compartmentalization thing in this case is a little tough. Even though the way I see it, you have a couple of different shooting teams. So most of the shooters come out of this New Orleans clique, right? And so there's not much compartmentalization there because they're all pretty much, they all have to plan out what they're doing in Dealey Plaza, et cetera. So the Butch Repository and the Knoll area fall under this. But you had some guys from Chicago. You had Dave Yaris from Chicago. Robert Bernard Baker and Lenny Patrick were in Dealey Plaza. You got a bunch of people who were not connected to that New Orleans crew. So they had to have been informed on some level of what the other crew was doing, right? So, and as far as compartmentalization, I haven't really come across that much. I think I've come across that more in the story of Oswald, the life story of Oswald, because they had to compartmentalize. If you're going to raise two children under the same name, you're going to have some level of compartmentalization keeping them apart. But often I found that compartmentalization broke down, particularly when it came to a couple of employers back in 1956. There was some breakdown of the compartmentalization there. But overall, I haven't been able to really see any overt compartmentalization. But I will say, the guys, go ahead.
Are you hinting there that these two Oswalds didn't even know who they were?
Well, there's an argument to be made that they did know, and I can give you a couple examples. So for me, the biggest example that they knew each other 100% and then were in on this coordinated scheme was Oswald allegedly gets arrested when he's in New York in 1953 for being a truant from school, and he's allegedly sent to this place called Youth House. And there's all kinds of contradiction over the dates on when he got arrested. And I can show that he was at Youth House before he actually got arrested 2 weeks later, which is crazy. But he speaks to a guy named Milton Kurian. And Milton Kurian is talking to this kid, and the descriptions he gave or not. He gives a description of a kid who's about 4'8" and kind of gaunt and skinny. Whereas we have records showing the real Oswald was 5'4" and about 130 pounds. But anyway, Milton Kurian says that Oswald made a statement to him that, because part of the issue with Oswald in tracking his original school records is if Oswald A was going here, where did Oswald B go, right? So there's some confusion over some of the schooling. And so Oswald tells Milton Kurian, he said that oftentimes when we got to a new community, knowing that I would ditch school, my brother would go in my stead, and that made it more impossible for me to go to school. Okay, so you have clearly an awareness that the person going to school in his place was his brother. That's one instance that I think pretty much wraps it up for me that they knew each other. Also, you have an incident in 1956 where Oswald is working for a company called Tujagues, and his manager is a guy named Frank De Benedetto. And there's it was like a shipping import-export company. It was on the docks. And Oswald was a runner, and he had to run documents like customs documents to the customs office and stuff like that. Well, there is another shipping company like that called J.R. Michel's in New Orleans. And so when you dissect the records, it looks as though, despite the dates not having been overlapping, you have what seems to be Oswald working for both of these companies at the exact same time, when that's impossible. And the two guys who ran the two different shipping companies knew each other, and they said it's just not possible that Oswald was working for both of us at the same time, when we have a clear record that he did, right? So just the fact that they were in such close proximity to each other daily, working for these companies, John Armstrong, another researcher who kind of focused on this area, he concluded they knew each other based on the fact that it would have been impossible for them to not interact, both working for these shipping companies. So, yeah, it's really strange, but I would say they absolutely knew who each other were, which kind of debunks the long-standing argument that, see, Armstrong had a theory that one of these kids spoke fluent Russian, was plucked from like an Eastern Bloc country, raised in America, to be sent back to Russia as a spy. That was the long-standing theory on why they would even do this in the first place. But based on like the information I just gave you, the fact they knew each other, there's no indication that Oswald had any kind of Russian accent or anything like that growing up.
Makes it sound like the spy in Russia thing is like cover to stop people from realizing that they were planning to do ops domestically.
Well, I kind of feel like the entire purpose of this operation in the first place was like a pre-Cold War early experiment on raising a duplicate to get him in the Soviet Union. And I think that's what happened. He obviously goes to the Soviet Union, so the plot came to fruition, right? To me, the result of the plot is, justifies all the stuff that led up to it. And so, yeah, I think that he was just sent to the Soviet Union just to, like, when you look at the false defector program, none of those people did anything. They just went there. And so what did the Russians do? The Russians had to dedicate how many people to watching these guys 24 hours a day for years. They spent, I don't even know how much money they spent, hundreds of thousands of rubles or whatever the equivalent would have been back in the day, just to watch these people who were doing absolutely nothing, right? Like getting them to burn their resources and spin their gears. I think
you
that's
think
what
it's
the
a
whole
war of
purpose.
attrition thing?
Yeah, I think that's what the whole false defector program was. Because I haven't gotten to do my intense study on Russia yet. I have to finish my next book, and then I'm going to move on to Russia, which I'll probably spend a year just going over the documents. But unless there's some other weird shenanigans going on in Russia, then I think he probably just went there to do nothing and get them to wonder why he's there, right? Because he started to try to come back within like 6 months. He's there for like 6 months, and he's already started writing letters to the State Department saying, get me the hell out of here. So all that stuff about turning in his paperwork and wanting to become a Russian citizen, like that, none of that ever happened. And it was all recanted pretty much by the time they gave him his work papers in Minsk. So yeah, the whole Russia thing I'm very interested in. My Russia's still a mystery because I do have some conflicting information on Oswald. There's just pictures of Oswald that just don't look quite right from over there. There's one picture of him and Marina standing on a bridge. Now, Oswald, on his paperwork, when he gets out of the Marines, he's 5'11". When he's arrested on November 22nd, he's only 5'9". And this picture of Oswald in the Soviet Union with Marina, she's only like 5'1" or 2, and he's only like an inch taller than her in this picture. So it's like, what is going on here? Somebody's lying about something, right? Somebody's not who they say they are. And so I'm interested to see how that unfolds. But yeah, there's some major questions with some of the photographic record of Russia.
Now, what do you have to say on CIA recruiting, networking, finding people, finding assets? You know anything about that?
Well, I think it was different back in the day as compared to today. Today, I don't know how they get people today. I really don't. Back in the day, though, I'll tell you, I'm convinced Kerry Thornley got recruited into the CIA as a junior in high school when he won what's called the Voice of Democracy contest. So Kerry Thornley was a straight up nerd, teacher's pet type all through high school. This guy would like enter science fairs and just like beat everybody. He would enter debate contests and beat everybody. And then he does the Voice of Democracy contest, which anything with the word democracy in it is a CIA project. Sorry. It's just how it is. Like no one else talks about the democracy unless you're CIA. So I'm convinced he got picked up there because he ends up going through, this is where it gets interesting with Kerry Thornley. He ends up joining the Marines, allegedly in the reserves, but he goes through full active duty basic training and individual combat training over the summer between his junior and senior years. So I don't know what he was doing during his actual time in school. I don't know. I mean, the guy honestly might have just dropped out and got his GED and went right into the Marines, because I have a Marine record starting in September 56 at a time when he's supposed to be in high school for his senior year. And he tells the Warren Commission and he tells everybody, the Jim Garrison trial, he tells everyone he didn't join the Marines until September of 68 or 58. I'm sorry, 58. And so that information is all wrong. I found his actual duty roster, and that guy went through some intense training for 2 years before he even ever got to the point where he said it was his joining date, right? So all of his reserve stuff was not reserve. It was actual full-on Marines. He went through amphibious assault training at some point, because as soon as he gets to Atsugi, he went and did a huge amphibious assault drill called Operation Strongback. And then I found pictures of him at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, taking an aircraft electronics course. And he graduated that in December of 1957. Okay, December of 57, he just finished going through the same courses Oswald went through when Oswald was in the Marines at Biloxi. Okay, so and then he goes to Atsugi right after that, and he's in Oswald's unit. So what did they do? So it seems like he joins the Marines. He goes through his amphibious assault training at some time when he's supposed to be in high school. And then from there, they put him on the same exact track that Oswald was on, including sending him to Atsugi to be in the same unit. He gets to Atsugi and he starts to do his own investigation into Oswald. He starts asking people about Oswald. He's taking pictures, and he uses an alias of Rick Thornley. Okay, all of this is suspect. And I'm convinced it all started when he was back in high school. So how many other people got recruited out of high school back in the day? I'm assuming a lot.
Yeah,
I'm assuming a lot.
I hear about Ivy League a lot. People get scouted there a lot, but yeah, high school is kind of weird. Maybe they used to do that more.
They probably did. It probably doesn't go over so well anymore, especially after things like Watergate, where the CIA gets a bad rep, you know.
Well, I know you got to leave soon. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before you go?
Nope. I think we touched on a lot of good stuff. And if anyone's interested in what happened during the assassination, my book is called A Warning from History. Second edition will be out probably about a year from now. I'm going to start working on that soon. And my podcast is Cory Hughes Bloody History.
Cool. And what about where people can follow your token there?
Independentmediatoken.com is our website. We have a Telegram and an X also. So yeah, people's interest in that would be phenomenal.
All right. Well, thank you, Cory, for joining us. You're an illustrious guest on a extremely elite show. Where only the greatest VIPs are seen, and you're one of the greatest of the greatest.
I appreciate your time, for sure.
Your time. And we'll let you go to your other pursuits.
All right. You guys have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Have a good night.